Hi, Marianne here, and in the last video I made reference to several terms that I use that you may or may not have ever heard before as substitutes for other terms, and I mentioned those terms. And today I would like to uh, bring in a few more terms and also tell you why I'm using them as opposed to the alternatives that I mentioned before, along with some others. Language is an incredibly powerful tool, and it was introduced by the various races and civilizations that decided that they would prefer to control the consciousness progression process and limit our original mind-body complex and human template capacities for dynamic, free-flowing creation. And they introduced language because we were regressing from our original capacities to communicate telepathically with each other and frankly with the physical environment. And as it turns out, either by plan or by design, language is also a potent weapon for keeping us regressed and regressing us further. Language ties into concepts and beliefs and ideologies and manners of thinking, thought forms. And ideologies and dogmas and things like that are always limiting in consciousness because by their very nature they are restricting our perspective and therefore access to higher order knowledge and free flow of pure creational potential and vital energies. They limit us. They limit us. Now, in our current state of being, yes, we still have to use language and we still have to work with concepts so that we can communicate with each other and facilitate the awakening process until we regain some of these capacities, such as telepathy. But on our journey, it's really important to free ourselves from as many ideologies, thought forms, and concepts and dogmas as possible because they all limit us. They limit our thinking. They limit our creativity. They limit our individuality. And like I said, I understand that we have to still communicate and we have to use verbiage that the person with whom we're communicating can understand. But you learned in the last video too that self-mastery, the reattainment of self-mastery, is the cornerstone process of the awakening journey. And as part of our work, it's very important to free ourselves and get back to the uniqueness of ourselves, separate and apart from collective concepts, collective beliefs, collective ideologies and dogmas. And part of that work involves understanding what I call distortions. Distortions are false limiting concepts, thought forms, ideologies, belief systems, and and ego identifications and attachments. And these all have arisen from the millennia of social conditioning and engineering, energetic and physical genetic manipulation, and human self-irresponsibility. These distortions have atrophied the mind-body complex and our template's original capacities for fully transducing the higher order consciousness and vital energy of core self, and created energetic and consciousness bottlenecks and blockages that manifest within us and through us as self-destructive fear-based thoughts, emotions, and behaviors, as well as mental and physical health issues and limitations. In fact, the manifest distortions in our shared reality, for example, the widespread wars, genocide, poverty, starvation, illness, ignorance, natural resource abuse and hoarding, environmental abuse, inordinate wealth inequality, extreme weather events and climate change, etc., are all the direct result of the distortions in ourselves. So part of the work of self-mastery is, it's a key constituent. I can't tell you how important it is. It's the process of uncovering, taking responsibility for, and either transmuting or completely shedding layer upon layer of distortions in our mind-body complex and our template, so that their respective original capacities for transducing the natural inflow of higher order consciousness and creational energies are restored. Okay, so that's why I want to talk about language and terminology. For example, last time I referred to as our whole, full energetic self as core self, as opposed to spirit. I referred to as our template. I referred to our template, the human blueprint. I use that term as opposed to soul. And I also don't use or make reference to very often the term spirituality, because each of those terms is associated with religious beliefs. Yes, even the generic term spirituality has a religious root. And one of the laws of this reality is that, and awareness and consciousness progression, is that whatever we are participating in, we are evolving through. It affects our perspectives. It limits our, it can either expand or limit our perspectives. And that's why it's very critical that we choose our concepts, language, words very carefully. I also don't use the term divinity or source, because to me, those are also limiting. What both of those terms do is keep me one step removed from embodying the knowledge that I am a co-creator myself, in tandem, this projection in tandem with core self, in conjunction with our physical environment, with the planet, our solar system. We are co-creating this reality. We are responsible for it and ourselves. And my understanding at this point on my journey is that the whole of consciousness, the contents of consciousness, are, and what's going on here is the result of the creational capacities and the way creational energies are being used by the entities within it. Not some outside, unseen, abstract God, but by ourselves and others along with us in this consciousness. The closest I would come to using the term divine, instead of divine, I use absolute or permanence. That from which consciousness, all isness, all that is, sprang from, cannot be described. It's beyond any level of conscious comprehension. That which cannot be named. That is, to me, divinity. But I call it absolute because, again, divine, divinity are affiliated with externally imposed concepts that give away my power, that limit my ultimately coming to the understanding that I am a creator. I am a creator along with you and everyone else on this planet. We're the creators, and the other entities and other races and other civilizations. We are the creators. And consciousness arose, again, this is my best understanding, from not isness, not beingness, from absolute, that which cannot be named. And I also refer to it as permanence because all of consciousness is a constantly changing, morphing whole. Consciousness is one movement containing all the different factors and entities and realities and all that it contains. But it's one whole movement. Everything that we think, say, or do affects everything else to a point. And we are not the sole creators even of our immediate environment, our immediate personal reality, our little reality pocket or bubble. There is spillover and sometimes conscious intervention or interference within our reality bubble. Sometimes of a positive nature, we call those synchronicities typically, and sometimes of a not so positive nature, and that's usually referred to as energetic interference. But we, although we are not islands, we are not the single creators of all that is, we are creating it. We are co-creating it with every other creator in consciousness that exists. Consciousness came forth, in my understanding, as a result of absolute or permanence, that which does not change, cannot change, that which cannot be named, wanting to experience itself and every detail. And that entails, and that is why there are two fundamental aspects of consciousness. The light, if you will, and the dark. The light being consciousness, progressive consciousness, and the dark being consciousness, regressive consciousness. You see, creation cannot occur. We cannot keep growing and expanding and learning if there isn't friction. The two seemingly opposite forces of consciousness progression and consciousness regression. The other name for consciousness progression is service to others. The other name for consciousness regression is service to self. When consciousness arose from absolute, it enabled, or it just was, because absolute is the all. These are words escape me sometimes on these concepts because we don't have language for it, so please bear with me. Without opposing forces, there cannot be, and friction, there cannot be creation. That's how creation is spawned. And it's important that those of you on this journey, I've heard so many people, and I read it all the time, and so many websites are talking about, I want to ascend to, I also don't use ascension, because again, that keeps me as an active participant in the spirituality circles and realms and ideologies. But so many people refer to, when they talk about ascension, talk about ascending to the fifth density. They're talking about, oh, when it's there won't be any more duality. Well, I hate to be the one to tell you this, but that's not true. The duality, the duality of light and dark, consciousness progression, consciousness regression, good and evil, if you will, permeates consciousness. How could it not? There aren't any sections. Now, yes, within some realities, it's completely different than what we're experiencing now. Consciousness progressive entities and races and consciousness regressive entities and races are probably, and in many cases, more separate. There's less direct interference. In this reality, everything's basically a jungle because of the regressive nature that, the regressive cycle that we're in. Humans have been in both progressive and consciousness regressive cycles, and we're definitely in a consciousness regressive cycle right now. But that's coming to an end, and we have the opportunity to change that. Hence the awakening process and self-mastery work. It's our opportunity to get back on track, if you will. But there is not, in higher densities and higher dimensions are not any less dual in nature than the reality that we're currently in. That doesn't go away. People are thinking that, yeah, if I can just get there, then there won't be any more duality, and it's like, well, that's not the case. That's not the truth. And polarity, let's talk a little bit about polarity. I think there's sometimes confusion. Duality is what I said. It's the inherent dichotomy of consciousness progressive or consciousness regressive thoughts, feelings, behaviors, perspectives. You're either one or the other. In everything you think, do, and say, you're choosing either a consciousness progressive or a consciousness regressive action or thought or behavior. And polarity, in this framework, in this discussion, polarity, there is only one. The truth of all is that there is one. There's the whole of consciousness and all its incomprehensible parts and aspects, and progressive, regressive, that inherent duality. Polarity is consciousness way, or the mechanism within consciousness that enables us to ultimately discover that hot and cold are one and the same. It's just a matter of degree. And when you understand this, the seeming difference, the seeming polarity and opposites are reconciled. And this is one of the higher level understandings that will make an immense difference in the progress of your awakening journey. And another good example of that is people who are really deeply disturbed and upset by these other races and their actions, the things that they've been doing to us for millennia. And first and foremost, I'd like to say that not all of the beings who wanted to limit our capacities were doing it to harm us. Their true intention was that it was for the good of all, and that's how they would protect themselves from chaotic, dynamic, free-flowing creation. But the truth is, they just didn't understand what that means, because there were principles in place, they're still in place, about proceeding, how to proceed. What does it mean to be service to others, to be consciousness progressive? What that really means is that your choice of language, words, thought, action, behaviors, what you participate in, is all centered in raising your own consciousness and the consciousness of those around you who so choose that. It's not to be forced upon them. There are billions of people on this planet and a billion different reasons and a billion different journeys that they're on. They're all unique. And the best way to help others progress, first of all, is to be out there and let others know where you are and invite them to hear what you have to say. And either they can align with it to an extent and it's beneficial, or they don't and they move on. That's the way it goes. Or the work that you do, you are taking whatever steps that you can that are consciousness progressive to the best of your understanding. That's why it's so important to understand things from as high a perspective as we can get. Get altitude, gain more altitude all the time. Keep zooming out. And I'm not talking about living in la la land. I'm talking about zooming out so that we can bring what we see back in to our template, into this mind-body complex, and into this world. The awakening process is not about escaping this reality. It's about zooming out as far as we possibly can, taking in what we can, fully embodying it so that we become transducers of the highest order, our whole selves, our highest order intelligence and capacities, creational and energetic capacities in this reality. Now, there are those who have chosen, and that's their choice, to go completely with the love and light route and just totally avoid all of the other and become non-physical beings of light. Well, I'm here to tell you, and that's your choice. If that's the path you're taking, by all means, take it. But I can also tell you that many of these beings are coming back. They're showing up right now, have shown up in this reality, because they understood that by becoming light beings, and I'm not saying this is true across the board, but for many of them, they've come to the realization that that was an escape mechanism, that they were avoiding taking full responsibility for themselves, their lives, their environment, their reality, and their behaviors, their choices and actions. They were struggling greatly, probably some of them, in the realm of, in the polarity minefield, as I sometimes call it, because there is an art and a learned way of navigating it, because especially in this reality, we often have to navigate the polarity field. Even those of us who are primarily functioning outside of it, trying to transmute and reconcile the polarity so that we have a higher order vision of things and therefore can operate more in line with core self in this reality. But many humans, because they hadn't yet learned this, or they were just tired, or they just, decided they just didn't want to deal with it anymore, chose the path of light and love and becoming a being of light. And as I said, it's your choice. Only you can tune into core self and your expectations for this aspect of yourself in this reality at this time. Only you can determine that. But that's not where I am. And that's not where I'm heading. At one point, I also thought that I wanted to evolve in such a way that I would end up being a part of a reality where that my pocket of reality would be centered in, let's say, for example, a little community where everyone, was back to basics, farming, raising their own food. And I'm not against that, believe me. I'm not saying I don't want that. Everybody cooperates to help each other. That's all good too. They've got the children and the partners and everything's light and love, and there's nothing wrong with this either. But what I choose, again, to me, I realized for myself that that was another form of escape, for taking the responsibility that my original template and mind body complex were designed to take. Full responsibility, not just for myself, but for the progression of this physical environment and to those around me. And I want to talk about that a little more. I think I got off track on that when I was talking about, it's not about forcing this on anybody. Oh, I've been that route. When you first wake up, or when I first woke up, and I've spoken to many others who've gone through the same process, the revolutionary. You just want to tell everybody, you need to know this, you need to know this. And it's not the way to go. But I think it's a natural part. It is a natural part of going through the awakening process. As you learn about, at the first level, what's going on in this world, the 3D level, the physical realm. And then you start learning about the non-physical being and entities and interference that have gone on, the manipulation. And it's breathtaking. But we all go through that phase and work through it and hopefully move beyond it. But many of us are at the point where creating these little idyllic communities is not what we really are here for. And I understand that it is my journey to bring my highest order state of being and consciousness and creational capacities into this world. And that means the world as it is. Not as I wish it would be, but the world as it is right now. And again, this is no easy task. If you're seriously plodding along the awakening journey path, self-mastery path, then if you've been going at it for any length of time, that's one of the first things you learn is the degree of difficulty, the degree of challenges that you'll face in this. But my understanding is that I, as a full human, chose the path of full responsibility. And that means bringing it all back into this reality, not trying to find ways to run away. So, and back to where I got started in this conversation was language, which ties us into various concepts. And speaking of concepts, I spoke of and will often speak of density and dimension. And I'll reiterate again that the difference between the two is that density is the level of conscious awareness and energetic and creational capacity abilities. And the dimension is the, quote, space in physicality that unfolds around density. Okay? Space, level of consciousness awareness, and, excuse me, level of energetic abilities. Okay? Density leads to level of dimension. And because of the duality that I spoke of earlier, the consciousness progressive and consciousness regressive that are fundamental to consciousness, being of higher density doesn't mean that you are a kinder, more benevolent being. It just means that you got some more stuff figured out than lower density people. And you're using it in ways that are not consciousness progressive. You're using them in ways that are consciousness regressive. These skills, these understandings, these creational capacities. Consciousness regressive also means that beyond certain densities, the regressive capacities take on a whole different, almost incomprehensible function. And I'm not going to get into that right now. But it's just really vital that you get where I'm coming from and the reason I make certain choices of words and phrases, because I'm not by the way, encouraging you to take on my terminology. I'm explaining to you my vocabulary and why I use it. And if it works for you, great. I'm not telling you to not use it. What I am here telling you is that I hope it inspires you to choose your own, to consider why you're using certain terms and how they might be limiting your progression. Because in order to restore and activate the original human template and mind-body complex, we've got to clear the slate completely. We've got to let go of everything that we're attached to, and to function from one moment to the next from a place of, okay, I'll refer back to a religious reference, rebirth. In every moment, we are being reborn. Every moment is new. And to the best of our ability in every moment, to not be attached to any particular concept or ideology, but just to the extent where we can function in our day-to-day lives, in communication with others, out in the world, out in the polarity minefield, but to choose our own terminology, whatever works in the process of clearing our distortions, getting rid of anything that's limiting our expansiveness, our capacities for tapping back into higher order intelligence and energies. I mean, we've got to clear, in spirituality, they make reference to letting go, letting go, letting go. And that is a valid concept, because that's what we have to do. We have to clear any possible distortion from the mind-body complex and the template. And I'm going to close today, I think, with an exercise that I hope will help you do that. Maybe a couple. Try for just one day. I'd recommend trying it for several days if you can, but for just one day. Clear your mind, get centered and focused. Being in the present moment is another critical aspect of the awakening process. It's vital. But try for just one day or for 10 minutes. Everything that you see and encounter, sit outside on your veranda, on your porch, take a walk to the park, or sit in your living room and just look around. And as you do that, remove from your thoughts any labels. Remove any labels for everything you see. If you're looking at a tree, let that thought, that word float through, and just look at and experience its aspects. Touch it, get close enough. Just experience it without labeling it. Rough, smooth, green, yellow, brown, red. Just experience it. Smell it. Breathe it in. And do your best not to label. I think that's good for today. I hope that you found this information helpful. And if so, I look forward to being with you next time. Happy trails on your journey. Bye.